Chapter 6, Part 2 of The Coming of the Fairies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Piotr. The Coming of the Fairies by Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 6, Part 2 Independent Evidence for Fairies. Another gentleman who claims to have this most remarkable gift is Mr. Tom Charman, who builds for himself a shelter in the New Forest and hunts for fairies as an entomologist would for butterflies. In answer to my inquiries, he tells me that the power of vision came to him in childhood, but left him for many years, varying in proportion with his own nearness to nature. According to the seer, the creatures are of many sizes, varying from a few inches to several feet. There are male, female, and children. He has not heard them utter sounds, but believes that they do so of finer quality than we can hear. They are visible by night as well as by day, and show small lights about the same size as glowworms. They dress in all sorts of ways. Such is Mr. Charman's account. It is, of course, easy for us, who respond only to the more material vibrations, to declare that all these seers are self-deluded, or are the victims of some mental twist. It is difficult for them to defend themselves from such a charge. It is, however, to be urged upon the other side that these numerous testimonies come from people who are very solid and practical and successful in the affairs of life. One is a distinguished writer, another an ophthalmic authority, a third a successful professional man, a fourth a lady engaged on public service, and so on. To wave aside the evidence of such people on the ground that it does not correspond with our own experience is an act of mental arrogance which no wise man will commit. It is interesting to compare these various contemporary and first-hand accounts of the impressions which all these witnesses have received. I have already pointed out that the higher vibrations, which we associate with hot sunshine, and which we actually seem to see in the shimmer of noontide, is associated with many of the episodes. Apart from this, it must be admitted that the evidence is on the whole irregular. We have creatures described which range from 5 inches to 2.5 feet. An advocate of the fairies might say that, since the tradition has always been that they procreate as human beings do, we are dealing with them in every stage of growth, which accounts for the varying size. It seems to me, however, that a better case could be made out if it were pleaded that there have always been many different races of fairyland, and that samples of these races may greatly differ from each other, and may inhabit varying spots, so that an observer, like Mr. Tyrrell, for example, may always have seen woodland elves which bear no resemblance to gnomes or goblins. The monkey-like, brown-clad creatures of my professional friend, which were over 2 feet high, compare very closely with the creatures which little Baring Gould saw climbing on to the horses. In both cases, these taller fairies were reported from flat, plain-like locations, while the little old man type varies completely from the dancing little feminine elf so beloved by Shakespeare. In the experience of Mr. Turvey and Mr. Lonsdale, 2 different types engaged in different tasks were actually seen at the same moment, the one being bright-colored dancing elves, while the other were the brown-colored attendants who guarded them. The claim that the fairy rings, so often seen in meadow or marshland, are caused by the beat of fairy feet is certainly untenable, as they unquestionably come from fungi, such as Agaricus gambosus or Marasmius oreades, which grow from a centre, continually deserting the exhausted ground and spreading to that which is fresh. In this way a complete circle is formed, which may be quite small or may be of 12-foot diameter. These circles appear just as often in woods from the same cause, but are smothered over by the decayed leaves among which the fungi grow. But though the fairies most certainly do not produce the rings, it might be asserted, and could not be denied, that the rings once formed, whatever their cause, would offer a very charming course for a circular ring-a-rang dance. Certainly from all time these circles have been associated with the gambols of the little people. After these modern instances, one is inclined to read with a little more gravity the account which our ancestors gave of these creatures, for, however fanciful in parts, it still may have had some core of truth. I say our ancestors, but as a matter of fact there are shepherds on the South Downs to this day who will throw a bit of their bread and cheese over their shoulders at dinner time for the little folks to consume. All over the United Kingdom, and especially in Wales and Ireland, the belief is largely held among those folks who are nearest to nature. First of all, it was always supposed that they lived within the earth. This was natural enough, since the sudden disappearance of a solid body could only be understood in that way. On the whole, their description was not grotesque, and fits easily into its place amid the examples already given. They were of small stature, says one Welsh authority quoted in Mrs. Lewes' Stranger Than Fiction, towards 2 feet in height, and their horses of the size of hares. Their clothes were generally white, but on certain occasions they have been seen dressed in green. Their gait was lively and ardent, and loving was their glance. They were peaceful and kindly among themselves, diverting in their tricks and charming in their walk and dancing. This mention of horses is somewhat out of picture, but all the rest seems corroborative of what has already been stated. One of the best of the ancient accounts is that of the Reverend R. Kirk, who occupied a parish at Monteith, on the edge of the Highlands, and wrote a pamphlet called The Secret Commonwealth about the year 1680. He had very clear and definite ideas about these little creatures, and he was by no means a visionary, but a man of considerable parts, who was chosen afterwards to translate the Bible into Erse. His information about fairies tallies very well with that of the Welshman quoted above. He slips up in imagining that flint arrowheads are indeed fairy bolts, but otherwise his contentions agree very well with our modern instances. They have tribes and orders, according to the Scottish clergyman. They eat, they converse in a thin, whistling sort of language. They have children, deaths, and burials. They are fond of frolic dancing. They have a regular state and polity, with rulers, laws, quarrels, and even battles. They are irresponsible creatures, not hostile to the human race unless they have reason to be angry, but even inclined to be helpful, since some of them, the brownies, are by universal tradition ready to aid in the household work if the family has known how to engage their affection. An exactly similar account comes from Ireland, though the little folk seem to have imbibed the spirit of the island to the extent of being more mercurial and irascible. There are many cases on record where they are claimed to have shown their power, and to have taken revenge for some slight. In the Larne Reporter of March 31, 1866, as quoted in True Irish Ghost Stories, there is an account of how a stone, which the fairies claimed having been built into a house, the inhabitants were bombarded with stones by invisible assailants by day and night, the missiles hurting no one, but causing great annoyance. These stories of stone throwing are so common, and present such similar well-attested features in cases coming from every part of the world, that they may be accepted as a recognized preternatural phenomenon, whether it be the fairies or some other form of mischievous psychic force which caused the bombardment. The volume already quoted gives another remarkable case, where a farmer, having built a house upon what was really a fairy right-of-way between 2 raths, or fairy mounds, was exposed to such a persecution by noises and other disturbances that his family was at last driven out, and had to take refuge in the smaller house which they had previously occupied. This story is narrated by a correspondent from Wexford, who says that he examined the facts himself, examined the deserted house, cross-examined the owner, and satisfied himself that there were 2 raths in the vicinity, and that the house was in a dead line between them. I have particulars of a case in West Sussex which is analogous, and which I have been able to trace to the very lady to whom it happened. This lady desired to make a rock garden, and for this purpose got some large boulders from a field hard by, which had always been known as the Pixie Stones, and built them into her own rockery. One summer evening this lady saw a tiny green woman sitting on one of the boulders. The little creature slipped away when she knew that she had been observed. Several times she appeared upon the stones. Later the people in the village asked if the stones might be moved back to the field, as, they said, they are the Pixie Stones, and if they are removed from their place, misfortunes will happen to the village. The stones were restored. But supposing that they actually do exist, what are these creatures? That is a subject upon which we can speculate only, with more or less plausibility. Mr. David Gow, editor of Light, and a considerable authority upon psychic matters, at first formed the opinion that they were simply ordinary human spirits, seen, as it were, at the wrong end of the clairvoyant telescope, and therefore very minute. A study of the detailed accounts of their varied experience caused him to alter his view, and to conclude that they are really life forms which have developed along some separate line of evolution, and which, for some morphological reasons, have assumed human shape in the strange way in which nature reproduces her type, like the figures on the mandrake root or the frost fern upon the window. In a remarkable book, A Wanderer in the Spirit Lands, published in 1896, the author, Mr. Farnese, under inspiration, gives an account of many mysteries, including that of fairies. What he says fits in very closely with the facts that have been put forward, and goes beyond them. He says, speaking of elementals, "Some are in appearance like the gnomes and elves, who are said to inhabit mountain caverns. Such too are the fairies whom men have seen in lonely and secluded places. Some of these beings are of a very low order of life, almost like the higher order of plants, save that they possess independent motion. Others are very lively and full of grotesque, unmeaning tricks. As nations advance and grow more spiritual, these lower forms of life die out from the astral plane of the earth's sphere, and succeeding generations begin at first to doubt and then to deny that they ever had an existence. This is one plausible way of explaining the disappearance of the faun, the dryad, the naiad, and all the creatures which are alluded to with such familiarity in the classics of Greece and Rome. One may well ask what connection has this fairy lore with the general scheme of psychic philosophy. The connection is slight and indirect, consisting only in the fact that anything which widens our conceptions of the possible and shakes us out of our time-rutted lines of thought helps us to regain our elasticity of mind, and thus to be more open to new philosophies. The fairy question is infinitely small and unimportant compared to the question of our own fate and that of the whole human race. The evidence also is very much less impressive, though, as I trust I have shown, it is not entirely negligible. These creatures are in any case remote from us, and their existence is of little more real importance than that of strange animals or plants. At the same time, the perennial mystery why so many flowers are born to blush unseen, and why nature should be so lavish with gifts which human beings cannot use, would be solved if we understood that there were other orders of beings which used the same earth and shared its blessings. It is at the lowest an interesting speculation which gives an added charm to the silence of the woods and the wilderness of the moorland. End of Part 2 of Chapter 6.